Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. So, this episode is really fun because I feel like Sue and I go way back now, way back over the last year, through our clubhouse journey. And without further ado, Sue, please tell us about you and anything else that you'd like to share before we jump in.
Karen, I love that. We go way back that whole year. But what a year it's been. It's been such a joy to meet you. It really has. A little bit about me. Okay, so I like to describe myself as an inside out leadership coach. And I work with women who are on a mission to make the world better in some way. And what I've noticed in the time that I've been running my coaching practice is that it's really easy for women to think that to make something better, they have to do more. We're easily addicted, I think, to doing. And I describe myself as the inside out leadership coach because in my experience, it's not often that we need to do more, but simply that we need to be more. So I work with people to help them understand who they are and who they need to be from the inside out, their values and beliefs, their identity, and their ultimate purpose in being of service to the world or their world, depending on the change that they want to make. So hence inside out leadership.
It's so beautiful. Well, and I love how you also embody what you preach, for lack of a better word. You embody what you live out what you are doing in service to others. And I'm very struck by something that we talked about just before hitting record around your confidence journey. Would you share more about that?
Yeah, I've written a book since you sent me the question. I was really surprised, Karen, when I opened your email. My initial reaction was, Karen wants me to talk about my confidence journey. I don't know if I have one. It didn't feel like I had one. And so in true Sue style, I sat down in front of the laptop and tried to think what I would write or say. And testing out whether or not I have a confidence journey made me realize that at some point in my young childhood, there was a point at which I stopped feeling confident. And which I guess means that as a teeny tiny tot, it never occurred to me not to be confident, which I guess is often common sense, but it's not something we perhaps naturally explore. And I think what I realized was, whilst I may not have understood what it was to be confident as a child, I reached a point where I learned that being confident didn't equal being popular. I've used lots of negatives in there, so I'm hoping.
Say that one more time. Yeah, say that one more time, because that's
so
cool.
I reached a point where I realized that being confident didn't equal being popular. And that as a child, I may have confused or conflated popularity with confidence. I'm not sure that I realized, as I say, that I was confident before that moment. But losing confidence is the more significant memory that I was able to tap into when I was thinking about, where did my confidence journey start? It started with suddenly becoming unconfident. And my relationship with confidence as a child was as a performer. My brother was expected to sing, and I was expected to recite or perform in plays or drama of some sort. And there was a bit of a juxtaposition there, I think, in that if I was in the company of adults, I had quite elderly parents for parenthood at that time. So we were definitely in the seen and not heard generation, that's for sure, if you were in the company of adults, until the point in the family visit where the children were brought out to perform. It sounds a little bit like something out of The Sound of Music, doesn't it?
Yes, I was just thinking that.
It wasn't that grand. There was no staircase or anything. But we were very much expected to perform. And then as I grew older, I realized that that confidence wasn't something that made me popular with other children. There was something about the importance in children's company. There was something about the importance of fitting in and blending.
Sure.
And in my parents' company, you were expected not just to stand out, but to be outstanding. I was regularly submitted to competitions and all sorts of, performance opportunities.
Wow.
And, failure certainly wasn't an option. Not as I recall it. I'm sure my parents may have a different memory of it, but but for me, it never felt like failure was a popular option at home. You were expected to perform and to do well. They had invested money in your education, and therefore they wanted to see something in return. So there was definitely a parental expectation to perform and to do well and to stand out. And I can remember really in that kind of late childhood, early teens, the more they wanted me to stand out, the more I wanted to blend in, so that I wasn't different to other children. So there was definitely a battle at some point in childhood between this sense of confidence and performance, and wanting to be popular and to blend in and be part of the crowd. So I'm not really sure where that, how that kind of progressed in teenage years. But I guess the next point that I recognized in my journey as I was thinking about your question was that I then moved into a profession that was all about assessment and validation. Now, you'll probably be pleased to hear that, given I'm a nurse first. You'll be pleased to know that I was assessed for the skills and the experience that I had before I was let loose on the general public. But what I realized, because there's such a gift in your question, so thank you for this opportunity, Karen.
Yes, of course. I love it.
What I realized was that was really the start of my journey, where confidence now became about external validation. Your proficiency in something depended on somebody else's opinion and assessment of you. And if you were good at that thing, then that gave you confidence to go and do more of that thing. So somewhere in those like late teens, early 20s, in my first career, confidence became something different, and it still became about other people, but this time it was about proficiency. So that was quite interesting, because in my work now, this balance of internal and external validation is hugely important when people come and talk about wanting to make an impact in the change that they want to lead. And you'll get that with the work that you do. So I then rolled forward a few more years, if that's okay, in my story.
Of course.
I thought about the leadership roles that I'd taken. And I decided perhaps there I confused bravery with confidence. So this may or may not be unusual, I don't know. I would look for roles that really interested me. And often they were roles that were a big step up, or they were perhaps things that were different to things that not only I had done before, but that other people had done before. And I had, I guess, an unshakable belief that if I took on something that was big and complex and difficult, nobody would let me screw up, because it wasn't in anybody's best interests for me to do so.
Oh.
So I went through my 30s in roles with this sense of, I might get my ass kicked a few times, but that's the worst that can happen, because everybody needs this project to succeed. Therefore, I will learn, I will grow, I will achieve it with the support of those around me. Sometimes that was a little naive, I've got to be honest, but it never really occurred to me, looking back, that I wouldn't succeed. Never occurred to me, because it was in nobody's best interests for me to screw up.
That's
really
amazing.
Looking back, isn't it?
It's a fascinating way to see things.
I've been told that many times, Karen. I often have a very strange way of seeing things. But that is one of the oddest, I think. That's why I said to you earlier, I'm so grateful for the gift you gave me in this question, because I've never sat and thought about it this way. So, and sometimes I wonder why I don't really get imposter syndrome, literally.
Mhm.
And I think that's why.
Mhm.
Because I always left it for other people to decide whether my weaknesses were a fit or not, because I knew I was going into a role to play to my strengths. So yeah, that really made me look back at some of the roles and get a really different insight into what confidence has and hasn't been. And then that brought me, to 7 years ago, that might be 8, I've lost count, when I set up my own business. And I think that was when I began to understand the real importance of true confidence. Um, and confidence from the inside out, exactly as I was describing earlier, in terms of how I work with other people. That sort of confidence that comes from a sense of internal self-validation, not the validation of others. And I don't know about you in your journey with this, but I remember a real tussle in terms of self-identity.
Mhm.
And I remember very clearly when I said, I don't know, I've always had a label, there'd always been a label attached to a role profile that declared who I currently am at this stage in my life. And suddenly there was no label. There was my business name, and there was me, and there was that amorphous label coach that nobody ever really quite knows what it means or what it might involve. Um, and somebody said to me, you get to choose. Now it's your own business. You get to choose your
Oh,
identity.
nice.
And I didn't really know how to do that. Um, and I had to start to work through what that journey of self-validation looks like when you can no longer rely on other people's opinion, assessment, outward validation. I needed to learn to trust myself, and to find evidence to enable my mental monkeys to stop playing long enough to do that, because they could run amok at the best of times. And this might be a really strange analogy that I'm going to share with you now, but my coaching clients will tell you that I liken this experience to a root canal filling.
Oh
Have you
my
ever had one?
gosh. Tell me more. Tell us more.
So I know it's an odd analogy, but I think everybody remembers it when I use it. So I once had a root canal filling with a dentist who had an ego the size of Cardiff here in the UK. And he was very, very, very keen to tell me how good he was and how important it was that he was, probably the only person who could have saved the tooth. And he explained that it needed to be filled and the filling needed to be layered incredibly carefully, because even a hole the size of a grain of sand could let infection in. So in his in his eagerness to tell me just how good he was, and he clearly thought he was the best, and I still have the tooth, so maybe he was. Um, I think our monkey mind is exactly the same. I think we have to layer in the evidence for us to trust really, really carefully and consistently, because the tiniest hole in our evidence infects our thinking, and up we get that inflammation of self-doubt, just to continue the analogy further. Our self-doubt and self-belief will just rip through if there's even a tiny hole in our evidence. But when the mind can't find the hole, it learns to believe the evidence, and so the stronger our layers. I'm sat here layering it through, if anybody's not watching it on video, in my hands, because I can see it kind of layering now through
Yeah.
through the crevasse, really.
Mhm.
And often that's what it feels like, isn't it, when we're looking to find evidence on which to trust ourselves. It can feel like we're in a really deep crevasse, not there something much bigger than a solitary tooth, that's for sure. But when we find that evidence on which to trust ourselves, that for me is where we build our inside out confidence.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really long journey, isn't it?
That's beautiful. Well, I love the analogy of the tooth. That is a really good one. And even the word inflammation, I'd never thought about that related to self-doubt. That's really powerful right there. I mean, what a good analogy.
It is though, isn't
Wow.
it? That's exactly what it does. It inflames. We allow it to infect and inflame everything.
Yeah,
And I often think,
exactly.
why is self-doubt the only doubt that we don't doubt?
Mhm, mhm. Isn't that the truth?
There's the irony, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
the
it's
only
so
doubt
true.
that we don't.
Yeah. Yep.
I find that incredible.
It is
We're
amazing.
so willing to believe it.
Yes. Yes, we're so willing. And that is where we go spiraling downward,
Yeah.
or we continue to solidify those patterns. It's kind of like in the old days of the wagon wheels when they can get stuck in a rut over time, and
Yeah.
it's hard to actually physically well, not that I was there. I sound like I was there, but when they're so physically ground in, it's hard to lift them up and get on a new path. And it's
Yeah. We get into that rut, don't we? And
right,
it's incredibly
exactly.
hard. It's incredibly hard to find the
Yeah,
thing to move the wheel.
right.
And so that for me is as it's, I don't know, I always think of that dentist, and he was a strange chap, clearly very good at his job. And as I say, I certainly was left in no doubt of that. Um, but it always really works for me in terms of thinking about that. It has to be layered so carefully. And I
Mhm.
think when we look for evidence of things that we do well, we start to build that space where nothing can get in. And then our mind goes there first. And that's where I think we fall in line really with the belief in the way that we express ourselves, because the mind doesn't start going in 65 different directions. It says, oh, Sue Revell, she needs to go here now,
Yeah.
because she's done the work. She's done the work.
And that's really powerful. When just to land on what you just said, what's one of the things that you've done? If you could give us a specific example, especially for other people that are out there maybe feeling some doubt or trying to figure out, well, what do I actually do? When you say she's done the work, what's one step that someone could take to do the work?
I would say make a list of the things that you have done. So whatever that area is that you are feeling less than confident in, where is the evidence to the contrary? Get out your pen and a piece of paper, because
That's
actually
good.
that's much more useful than typing very often. And
Yes.
actually journal. I would tell a client typically to try and write at least a page of a
Okay.
list of things. So it's
Hmm.
not, you're not looking for three things. You really want 30.
Okay. That's
Allow
good.
your mind to
Tangible.
allow yourself to stretch your mind, to sit with it, to be thinking about that as you drive to the store, or as you're taking you drop the kids off and you're coming back, or I don't know. For me, the best place, I guess I would say, take yourself to the best place to go and do some big thinking, because that's always really
Ooh.
useful. If you've got that luxury and there's somewhere that enables you to think bigger, then go and make the longest list that you can, because this is years of evidence that you want to build, that
Yeah.
actually each time those mental monkeys would try and distract you, that you can go, actually, just, and there's this one, and there's this one, and there's this one. And they might be really small. If you're really struggling to start that list, then I would say find the smallest thing that you did that made the biggest impact, because leverage is so powerful,
Mhm.
in persuading our monkey mind,
Yes.
of that evidence that we need to build on. So find the one small thing. You know what it's like. Once you've got one thing on a list, other things will just pop into your mind, and it's about allowing them to do so. I
Yeah.
know other people, for instance, who would also, another way of doing this might be to actually ask yourself that question before you go to bed, and trust your unconscious mind to deliver that overnight.
Oh,
And
that's
pick up your pen the next
beautiful.
morning.
That's
Pick up your pen the next
great.
morning and see what has come to mind overnight. But don't curse me if they arrive at 4 a.m., because that's sometimes what happens, isn't it? You wake up with your list. And be grateful. Be grateful for that 4 a.m. call.
I love it.
Don't you find that though?
Yes. Yes, I do. Believe me, lots of times when I'm waking up, like, oh, I have this idea. And then it's a matter of getting out of bed enough to actually write it down. That's the other challenge. Well, Sue, give us an example for you about you. what are one or two things that you wrote down on that list when you did it the first time? Or maybe when you've
So,
done it recently?
do you know what? One of mine would be quite recent,
Yeah.
because one of the things I have struggled with recently in terms of confidence is dealing with menopause.
Hmm.
And so that's really current for me right now. And I'm lucky compared to many women that I do not have massive symptoms, but I have one symptom that has a massive impact, and that's what I've lovingly named menofog. The whole brain fog that accompanies menopause is like nothing I've ever experienced.
Oh,
And I struggle for words, I struggle for memories, and I think that obviously going through COVID season, as one of our mutual friends calls it,
yeah.
has done nothing to help that, because with everything taking place on screen for a year, we haven't had the opportunity to plant memories in time or space or color or experience in the same way that would help us to recall experiences. So I've had to go back a little bit deeper to find the evidence of where I have been really sharp in my thinking. And one example of that was one of those projects that I undertook when I thought nobody will let me screw up here. And it was very true, because it was opening a children's hospital. So nobody wants you to screw up on that one.
Oh my God.
And, and in the moments where I lose confidence about my ability to think, I take myself back to running a project that had 64 different working groups running at the same time,
Wow.
and reassure myself that somewhere deep inside is the person that managed that project with that level of complexity. And sometimes that's about here's my evidence for self-belief, and for believing, for remembering that I could do it and that that person is still in there, but also for trusting myself that those skills, even though I can't execute them in the same way right now, those skills are still part of who I am. And I think that's where the definition of confidence does shift for me, because very often we apply a definition of confidence that's about what we do. And I rather like, I don't know whether you know this book, Karen, I love it. It's Barbara Angelis's
Oh,
little
I
pink
don't.
book about confidence. Everybody
Oh.
always, my clients always know that I've gone for the little pink book if I want to share something with them.
What is this,
Um,
the name and the author again?
Barbara De Angelis, and the book is called Confidence, Your Ultimate Guide to Finding It and Living It. You know me, I've
Wow.
always got a book recommendation somewhere.
Yes, that's a beautiful title.
And she would agree with the conversation that you and I have previously had about confidence is based on who we are.
Mhm.
The moment that we place our confidence in what we do, or something that we're skilled at, we actually lose confidence, because um, it our confidence needs to be founded in our trust in ourselves, and not the outcomes or the products of what we do. Otherwise, the moment something goes wrong with one thing, or we fail to achieve the outcome that we wanted in one area, we actually I guess we fall victim really to the sense of the moment, rather than relying on the trust, the evidence that we can build in ourselves. She has a lovely quote. She says, when you base your confidence on who you are instead of what you accomplish, you have created something that no one or no circumstance can ever take away from you. And that's where I think that inside out confidence is really, really important. So that in those moments where maybe you're doing something that you do feel less confident with, that you feel really brave for even tackling, that's simply about the thing that you're doing. It's about your behavior. It's not about who you are.
That's
And
beautiful.
that's really important, I think, to building our confidence and trusting who we are from the inside out.
Wow. That's really that's oh, it's just so rich because like you and well, I don't want to speak for you. Let me just say, like many people in the world, and certainly the way that I grew up, is that it was all about my value was placed in what I could produce.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me, the more that I continue to live in the world, and the more I get older and the more I meet more people, how common this is for many of us as human beings. And so even to what I just said there, unintentionally, we are human beings, not human doings.
Doings, yeah.
Yeah. And so what could you tell us as far as a tip to help us be rather than do?
Well, I think you've just named a beautiful one, really, creating, placing that focus on being a human being and not a human doing. Thinking about who you are, who you want to be, how you want to be seen and remembered can often be a really helpful positioner in that, I think.
Mhm.
It really can help us to lift our focus to what we want others to see in us.
Mhm.
And Maya Angelou, that beautiful famous quote about, people will remember, I'm going to get the quote the wrong way now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh,
People will remember, they won't remember what you did.
they'll remember how you made them feel. I
Yes.
think it's the equivalent of that. It's the experience that people have of you that
Yeah.
takes us to that important place that enables us to think about who we are being in the world rather than just what we are doing. What we do has a place, but it needs to fall out of who we are being and not the other way around.
Yes, absolutely. Well, shifting for a moment, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, my word, Karen, didn't know you were going to ask that one. Um, I think the best piece of advice, I'm torn there between what are the best, some of the best bits of advice I have been given actually fell out of questions that were life-changing. But to stick to the spirit of the question, the best piece of advice I've ever received was on I think it was my very first management training course when I was around late 20s, early 30s. And I went to, I think it may have been a time management day, I thought. And I'm grimacing if you're not looking at the camera right now. But actually the piece of advice was really important. It was the only time, I think, in my career that somebody has told me, you are now paid to think. And that has often struck with me. It often struck with me through paid employment at different leadership levels, and remembering, really calling that to mind in those moments where it's really easy to get carried away again with the doing, and not stopping to consider my responsibilities in terms of thinking. But it's just as important now I have my own business, because again, it's really tempted to keep doing the things that bring the money in, all the stuff in the background, as you and I have discussed previously, that go towards making that happen. It's running your own business isn't just what you do, it's all the things that support what you do in order that people know about you and the work that you accomplish, particularly if you work with people online. So there's always a lot of tasks to undertake. And it's really easy, I think, to get lost, tired, frustrated with those things that you're learning. Gosh, it's a huge journey when you start up your own business, all the things you never ever dreamed you would need to know and be able to do or outsource. And there have been definite moments where I know I have sat right here in this seat and simply reminded myself that I'm still paid to think. And that thinking and planning is as important as executing and doing. So yeah, that's always been, I think, the single most important piece of management advice, certainly, that I've ever received.
Yeah.
Some of the questions that I've been asked have been way more practical, and you're like this because we know each other in the way that we do. It was a friend who once asked me, have you ever considered going to bed on the same day as you wake up?
I have to think about that. Have
I
you
had to
ever
think about it
considered
too.
going to bed on the same day that
Same
you
day
wake
as you woke up.
up?
And for
Okay.
those of us who go to bed after
I'm with you.
midnight on a regular
Yes,
basis,
you're right.
it was the most beautifully worded piece of advice, and very, very practical level. So if you're out there and you're a night owl like Karen and I,
Yes,
maybe that's one to remember too. It's definitely a very interesting question to ask someone.
it is. It
It
is. It
does
really
make you
makes you
think.
think. It does.
It does
Very
make you
much
think.
so. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, I want to ask you one more question as we wrap up.
Okay.
Tell us about a time when you didn't speak up, but wished that you had.
Oh, gosh. Do you know, there've been a few, Karen. And I guess, ironically, the most recent would be the 4 years where I didn't launch my podcast,
Oh, wow.
which is a
Wow.
slightly different interpretation, I appreciate, on your
Yes.
question.
Say more about that.
Well, what I'm thinking as I think through my answer to that and why it feels important to share is that often I listen to people who struggle to find their own voice. And I knew I had a voice. Everybody told me I had a voice. Most people told me I had the voice for podcasting. And I still didn't do it. And I procrastinated for 4 years. And now that I'm launching, episode 25 is currently live, it makes me realize that was quite foolish. I feel that there were a number of wasted opportunities to boost my business, to learn more about me, undoubtedly, because I'm definitely learning as much about myself as I learn about any guest through going through that process. It's made me shift my own focus more and more from, again, doing to being. It's teaching me how much I have learned about business, because it's a bit like running a new business. All the things that you put into place, as I'm sure you would agree, are no different to running your main speaker coaching practice. So you're doing the same things and hopefully doing them better, quicker, than the first time around. And there are just moments where I think, oh, I wonder where I'd be now. In fact, I know somebody who started around the time as I was thinking, and I think when I've got episode 25 live, she's on well over 250. So I can't even measure the difference.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm not going there. This isn't about comparison.
Right.
But I do, and I think it's really important to say that. But I do think that if there was a point at which I wish I had spoken up in a different way, it will be that I wish I'd launched the podcast. There's another part of me, of course, that knows that it's absolutely the perfect time.
Yes.
That the person who runs my podcast or hosts my podcast now isn't the person I was 4 years ago, and that it is a better show because Sue now runs it rather than Sue then. Yeah. So I'm very sane about it. But just for a moment there, you caught me with your question of there is, there's a time that I could have spoken out and made a different decision. But I will trust myself from the inside out that it's live at the perfect time for the audience that need to hear it.
That's beautiful. Well, that's a really good place to wrap up for all of us too.
You ask great questions, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
You really do make people think. I love that.
It's
good to be made to think. Thank you. It's been a real gift.
Well, I'm so glad. Tell us where we can reach you.
Oh my word. Now there's a question I haven't prepared for. Let's start with the podcast. The podcast is the Women on a Mission show, and Karen is one of my forthcoming guests. So if you haven't had enough of Karen on this wonderful show of hers, you really need to come and listen to her talking on mine, where I get to put the questions. So come and hear some of Karen's amazing answers and her experience of being a woman on a mission. I also run a Facebook group, which is the Women on a Mission Facebook group. So that's nice and easy to remember. Other than that, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or simply come and find me at my website, SueRevell.com.
Awesome. So great, Sue. Thanks so much and have a wonderful evening. I know it's my morning, it's your evening, and hopefully we won't stay up too late.
I might even try and go to bed the same day as I woke up, Karen. Unlikely, but I might try.
Nice. Have a good one. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.